If you were dropped into London in the year 1850, the first thing to strike you would not be the smell, not the mud, not the smoke, not even the sight of 1,000,000 souls pressing through narrow lanes. It would be the sound. Modern people tend to imagine the past as a quieter place, a gentler world of horse carts meandering along cobbled lanes while church bells peal softly through morning mist. They picture candle-lit rooms, hushed conversation, the creak of a wooden floor. They picture something approaching peace. They are quite wrong. Victorian London was not peaceful. It was one of the loudest places on earth, a city of iron and steam, of coughing engines and cracking whips, of grinding wheels and pounding hammers, of barking dogs, drunken songs, crying infants, clanging bells, and the endless percussion of human footsteps upon naked stone. There was no insulation to speak of, no rubber tires, no electric motors whirring softly behind sealed walls. Every sound struck bare cobblestone and bounced between buildings of brick and mortar, multiplied and distorted until the city itself seemed to vibrate. You would hear London before you arrived. You would hear it through illness, through hunger, through exhaustion. You would hear it in your sleep, or rather, you would fail to sleep because of it. You would hear it until the day you died, and in the denser, darker quarters of the East End, silence itself had become so rare as to be almost unrecognizable. This was the sound of the largest city in human history, and by the end of a single week inside it, you would understand something unsettling. The Industrial Revolution did not merely change how people lived, what they ate, or where they worked. It changed what human beings heard. It rewired the very texture of daily experience through sound. Before dawn. The iron wheels begin. At 4 in the morning, London does not wake gradually. It wakes violently. Somewhere outside your window, iron-rimmed wheels slam against uneven cobblestones with a force that sends tremors through the walls. These are not the muffled, forgiving sounds of modern rubber. These wheels are solid wood bound tight with iron, and every crack and ridge in the road becomes a hammer blow. Clack, clack, crack, thud. The sound is relentless, rhythmic, and brutal. A coal wagon crawls through the darkness, the horses exhaling clouds of steam into freezing air, chains rattling beneath the cart like dragging irons. The driver shouts, not from anger, but necessity. Everyone shouts in London. The city is simply too loud for ordinary speech. Another cart follows, then another, then 3 more. Coal deliveries begin before sunrise, because London burns fuel in quantities that would astonish a modern observer. Every house, every bakery, every brewery, every ironworks, every hospital, the empire runs on coal, and coal arrives before daybreak with all the subtlety of an artillery barrage. You pull a thin blanket over your head. Then the bells begin, not one church, hundreds. London in 1850 is a forest of bell towers, Anglican spires, Catholic domes, nonconformist chapels, and they are not coordinated. Some announce the hour, some call worshippers to morning prayers, some warn factory workers that tardiness will cost them wages. The bells overlap across the fog in strange metallic waves, some deep and resonant, some shrill and cracked with age. The sound travels through wet morning air, bounces between stone facades and narrow passages, and wraps itself around the city until every street feels as though it were made of bronze. You are not waking naturally. London is waking you by force. 6 o'clock, the city's true voice. By 6 o'clock the streets are alive in a way that demands your full attention. Thousands of boots strike the pavement in uneven, overlapping rhythms. clogs, leather-soled shoes, wooden pattens, bare feet wrapped in rags. Workers flood towards factories in rivers of exhausted humanity, their breath forming low clouds in the morning cold. Costermongers push barrows over uneven stones. Delivery boys run with parcels tucked beneath their arms. Street sweepers work their brooms furiously ahead of the crowds, because a street unswept is a street knee-deep in horse manure, and London has more horses than any city in history. And above all of it rises the true voice of industrial London: steam. A factory whistle tears through the air with a sound that cannot be adequately described on a page. It is not the polite toot of a modern kettle. It is closer to something animal being put to violent death, a giant mechanical shriek that cuts across every other noise in the city and demands obedience. Children flinch, dogs bark and scatter, pigeons explode from rooftops in panicked clouds. The whistle means work has begun. It means be at your machine, be at your loom, be at your bench. And workers who are late discover very quickly that Victorian factory owners have no sympathy whatsoever for human frailty. Before industrialization, most people organized their labor around daylight, seasons, and the natural rhythms of weather and harvest. Now human lives move to the rhythm of machines, and machines, as any worker in 1850 could tell you, are entirely without mercy. Inside the factories, the roar of the revolution. Follow the crowd into the East End, and the noise changes character entirely. It becomes something physical. Massive weaving machines thunder inside brick mills with a sound like sustained artillery, not the sharp crack of a single cannon, but the continuous rolling bombardment of a whole battery. Iron pistons slam up and down in their cylinders. Drive belts whip through the air overhead. Metal gears grind against metal teeth in a constant, high-pitched screech. Steam valves release jets of pressurized air with a hiss that penetrates every thought. The floors vibrate. The walls vibrate. The air itself seems thick with mechanical violence. Inside the larger mills, the noise reaches a level where normal human communication becomes impossible. Workers cannot hear each other even when standing inches apart and shouting directly into each other's faces. Children, and there are many children in these factories, some barely past the age of 7, learn to communicate through hand signals and gestures, a silent language born of industrial necessity. After years inside these mills, many workers begin losing their hearing before they have reached adulthood. Industrial deafness is simply accepted as an occupational cost, like missing fingers or ruined lungs. And still the machines continue, hour after hour, shift after shift, day after day, pass an iron foundry, and the noise takes on an almost supernatural quality. Giant hammers slam glowing metal with explosive, bone-shaking force. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact sends vibrations up through the soles of your shoes and into your ribs. Sparks burst in orange cascades across the darkness. Workers move through the heat in practiced choreography, dragging iron bars through fire with long tongs, communicating through a system of instinct and repetition developed over years. The foreman screams his instructions. Nobody hears him. Then comes a sound that silences even the foundry for a moment. Somewhere deep inside the building, a massive sheet of metal falls. The crash rings out like a cannon shot, echoing off the brick walls and rolling across the factory floor. Everyone freezes. Faces turn, eyes scan the darkness for fire, for collapsed machinery, for a man lying motionless on the floor. Industrial London is full of sudden, spectacular death. A loose chain, a snapped drive belt, a boiler running above pressure that chooses today to resolve the situation permanently. Factories kill thousands of workers every year, and the sound of disaster always arrives before the news. The river, Empire made Audible walk south towards the Thames, and a different soundtrack emerges, older, deeper, stranger. The river in 1850 is not peaceful water. It is organized chaos, wearing a thin disguise of routine. Ship bells ring through the fog at irregular intervals, each vessel announcing itself to the invisible others sharing the river. Dock workers scream cargo tallies across the noise of chains and wood. Crates crash onto planks. Ropes strain and creak under impossible loads. Steam tugboats cough thick black smoke, while their paddle wheels churn the filthy water of the Thames into brown foam. Foreign languages echo across the waterfront in bewildering variety. Irish labourers shout to each other in Gaelic. Chinese sailors call instructions across their decks. Indian crewmen, African dock workers, Scottish merchants, West Indian traders. The British Empire has gathered the entire world into one dirty, magnificent river, and the river never stops talking. Somewhere in the livestock pens nearby, animals await slaughter or transport. You hear pigs squealing in stacked wooden crates, chickens shrieking in wicker baskets. A cart horse loses its footing on slippery wet stone and goes down hard, screaming in a way that cuts straight through the dock noise. Not the familiar neigh of a calm animal, but the full-throated scream of a large creature in sudden, genuine terror. And beneath all of it, a sound that requires a moment to identify: coughing, human coughing, deep, wet, persistent. You begin to notice it everywhere once you have heard it the first time. Workers coughing as they haul ropes, women coughing as they sort fish, children coughing as they run errands. Coal smoke has been settling into the lungs of this city for generations. Consumption takes the young. Bronchitis claims the middle-aged. And still the coal burns because without it, the whole magnificent, terrible machine of empire simply stops. Midday, the theatre of voices. By midday, the streets have become a performance. Victorian London does not advertise with printed signs alone. It advertises with human lungs, and the street sellers of the mid-19th century have developed their craft to a fine art. Each vendor cultivates a distinctive cry, a melodic rhythmic call designed specifically to cut through urban noise and lodge itself in the memory of passing shoppers. Hot eels! Hot eels! The eel seller stretches each syllable into something almost operatic, his voice carrying 3 streets away. Fresh watercress, penny a bunch. A girl of perhaps 12 moves through the crowd with a basket on her head, her cry practiced and precise as a musical instrument. Chestnuts, chestnuts all hot. Muffins, muffins, knives to grind, any knives to grind. Knife grinders push their sharpening wheels through alleys while metal screams against spinning stone, sparks flying. Organ grinders crank mechanical music from battered wooden boxes, the tunes distorted and slightly wrong-pitched from worn cogs and missing notes. Street musicians play fiddles outside public houses, their strings barely audible above the surrounding din. Crossing sweepers call out to passing gentlemen. Ballad singers bellow their penny-sheet lyrics with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Then, somewhere in the crowd, a woman screams. You spin towards the sound instinctively. Nobody else does. Because screaming is, in Victorian London, entirely ordinary. Fights erupt in crowded streets with the inevitability of weather. Domestic arguments spill through thin walls and open windows. Pickpockets are occasionally caught and beaten on the spot before police arrive. Police whistles, the distinctive metal shriek of a metropolitan officer, pierce the noise periodically, and crowds gather around conflict the way theatre audiences gather around performances, because in a city without cinema, without radio, without television, real violence is simply one of the available forms of entertainment. Evening. Gas lamps and tavern songs. As afternoon slides into evening, the city changes register. Darkness arrives early in London, earlier still in winter, when fog thickens the air and reduces visibility to the length of an arm. The gas lamps begin to hiss. Lamplighters move through the streets in methodical routes, carrying long poles tipped with flame, and as each lantern ignites, there is a soft, intimate explosion, psh, followed by the quiet, persistent hiss of burning gas. Multiply this across thousands of street lamps, and it becomes a city-wide murmur, a low undertone beneath everything else, the sound of London holding itself together after dark. And now nightlife begins in earnest. Pub doors burst open and music spills into alleys. Victorian taverns are not the quiet retreats of popular imagination. They are ferociously loud, aggressively sociable, utterly uninhibited. Tables are slammed, tankards crash, men roar political arguments at each other across packed rooms, women laugh through tobacco smoke, songs erupt without warning from one corner and spread across the room like fire through dry grass. Not beautifully, not tunefully, but with a force and collective energy that can shake the windows in their frames. You push through the door of a tavern somewhere near Whitechapel. The floor is sticky, the air is thick with tallow candles, tobacco, sweat, and spilt ale. In the corner, a piano player hammers out a music hall tune, while workers fresh from 12-hour factory shifts drink with the focused determination of people who have very little time left before they must do it all again. Somebody begins a sea shanty. Within 30 seconds, the entire room is roaring the chorus. You cannot hear the person standing directly beside you. Outside, carriage traffic continues along the main roads, iron wheels chattering on stone. The wealthy return from theatre and opera in private broughams. The somewhat less wealthy travel by omnibus, packed 14 to a vehicle designed for 12. The horses labouring under the weight. The night cabs clatter through the lamplight, their drivers calling out for fares. London never truly sleeps. Not anymore. Industrial civilization has abolished natural silence as thoroughly as it has abolished natural light. After midnight, the hidden city. Past midnight, a different London emerges from the fog, footsteps behind you, fast, deliberate, closer than they should be. A figure dissolves into an alley. Police whistles sound in the distance, then running feet, multiple sets, converging on something you cannot see. Victorian policing is thin on the ground at this hour, and the darkness belongs partly to those who prefer it that way. Women stand in doorways along certain streets, their voices soft and practiced. Drunken men stagger through mud. Newspaper pages blow across wet pavement. A feral dog noses through the contents of an overturned dustbin. The river smell drifts in from the south, not entirely unpleasant in the cold night air, almost masking the underlying stench of a city with inadequate sewage and millions of horses. And then comes what may be the saddest sound in all of London. Children working at night. Tiny chimney sweeps, some still small enough to climb inside a flue, cough in dark alleys after completing their rounds. Newsboys, some no older than 8, still shout headlines on street corners after midnight, their voices reedy and cracked with exhaustion. Orphan children sleep beneath bridges while wagons thunder overhead on the planks above, the vibration rattling through their bones as they sleep. A baby cries through the wall of an overcrowded tenement. Then another still. Entire families, 4, 5, 6 people, share a single room. Every argument is communal. Every cough is shared. Every nightmare breaks multiple sleepers. Noise in the overcrowded quarters of Victorian London is not merely an annoyance. It is the inescapable texture of poverty itself, the sound of too many human beings compressed into too little space with too few resources and no recourse whatsoever. The horses, a civilization with a heartbeat. Perhaps the sound most alien to modern ears is one that requires no factory, no furnace, no steam engine, hundreds of thousands of horses. London in 1850 depends entirely on animal power for everything that does not happen on a river or a railway. Horses pull omnibuses, delivery carts, beer wagons, sewage carts, ambulances, fire engines, private carriages, removal vans, coal wagons, costermongers' barrows, and the great dray horses of the breweries, pulling loads that strain the imagination. The city sounds alive partly because it is alive, not merely mechanically, but biologically. You hear hooves on stone constantly, a percussive soundtrack that varies from the quick, light tap of a carriage horse trotting to the deep, heavy thud of a dray horse hauling a full load. Harness chains jingle, bits clink. Horses breathe audibly in cold air, great panting breaths that steam in the early morning. Whips crack, not always on the horses, sometimes just in the air as a signal, a word the animals understand better than speech. Sometimes horses scream, not neigh, scream. It happens when a horse slips on wet cobblestones and goes down, when a shaft breaks and strikes an animal, when something in a crowd frightens a horse already exhausted past the point of good temper. A fallen horse can stop a busy street entirely, traffic backing up for hundreds of yards while handlers attempt to get the animal upright again. Dead horses, and they die regularly in the streets, require specialist removal teams, because a horse carcass weighing half a ton cannot simply be lifted by 2 men and carried to the gutter. Before the internal combustion engine replaced them, the horse was the engine of civilization. And civilization, it turns out, had a heartbeat made of hooves. Rain, the city in a different key. When rain falls on Victorian London, and it falls often enthusiastically and at considerable length, the city sounds change. Carriages begin to hiss through mud rather than clatter over stone. Footsteps soften. The sharp, percussive quality of the street gives way to something darker and more liquid. Factory smoke sinks lower over rooftops in the damp air, and the smell of wet coal mingles with the smell of wet stone and wet horse. Rain taps against window panes. Gutters overflow with black water laced with coal dust and street muck. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls over the city, and for one brief, extraordinary moment, the machines almost seem quiet. Then lightning, and immediately factory whistles scream again through the storm, because industrial London never pauses for weather. Rain is not a reason to stop. Cold is not a reason to stop. Fog so thick you cannot see your own hand is not a reason to stop. The machines run, the shifts continue. The empire does not take days off for inclement weather, and the workers who serve it cannot afford to either. That may be the most frightening sound of Victorian London, not the hammering, not the whistles, not the screaming of injured animals or the crash of falling metal. It is the relentlessness, the absolute refusal to stop. The sound of a civilization that has decided human beings are most usefully considered as components in a much larger machine, and components do not rest when it rains. Wealth and quiet, sound as privilege. Walk westward, away from the docks and the factories, into the broad streets and white stucco facades of Mayfair, Belgravia, Kensington, and you enter a different acoustic world. Not silence, but something approaching it. The wealthy protect themselves from noise using distance and architecture. Thick curtains absorb echoes, deep carpets swallow footsteps, larger rooms dilute the sounds of neighbors. Servants manage the domestic machinery of wealthy households so invisibly and quietly that the occupants need never be aware of it. The clatter of a kitchen 2 floors down barely registers in a well-appointed drawing room where piano music plays softly beside a crackling fire. But even here, industrial London intrudes. Through the heavy drapes you can still hear carriage wheels on the road outside. The distant boom of a foundry carries farther than its owners intend. Church bells observe no class distinctions, and in the kitchen, in the scullery, in the servants' quarters tucked beneath the roof, the noise of daily life continues unfiltered. Sound in Victorian London is a measure of privilege. The wealthy hear the city reduced to a background murmur. The poor hear it in full, unmediated, inescapable. The poorest of all, those packed into cellar rooms and overcrowded tenements within earshot of the docks and foundries, hear it as something close to a sustained physical assault. Quiet, in 1850 London, is something you purchase, and most people cannot afford it. Sleepless. The assault on the nervous system. Imagine trying to sleep in a rented room in Whitechapel. The mattress is damp. Through the wall, strangers argue in a language you may not speak. A child somewhere in the building cries without stopping. Carriages continue on the street outside, even at 2 in the morning, even at 3. Drunken men sing beneath the window. A dog barks at something in the alley. Church bells strike 1, then 2, each quarter hour, announced to anyone still foolish enough to be seeking sleep. A factory whistle screams before dawn as the night shift ends and the early morning shift begins. Modern research into urban noise has established that constant acoustic disruption increases rates of stress, anxiety, heart disease, aggression, and cognitive impairment. It disrupts sleep architecture in ways that accumulate over time into serious physiological damage. Victorian Londoners did not have access to these studies. They simply lived inside the evidence, and they drank heavily, consistently, desperately, partly because alcohol was the most widely available anesthetic for a nervous system under permanent assault. And yet millions stayed, because London also meant something that could not be found in the countryside: wages, opportunity, trade, empire, survival. The same sounds that destroyed peace also signaled possibility. The hammer meant work, the whistle meant employment, the crowded dock meant food was arriving and commerce was continuing, and the whole elaborate, brutal structure of Victorian prosperity was still holding together. Noise had become proof that civilization was functioning, and that was worth a great deal to people who had very little else. What is lost? The sounds that will not return. Many of the sounds of 1850 London are gone forever. The street cries of costermongers and sellers vanished with the arrival of supermarkets and fixed-price shops. The great iron wagon wheels disappeared beneath rubber tires. Steam whistles fell silent when steam gave way to electricity. Gas lamps stopped hissing when electric light arrived. Horse traffic disappeared from London streets in the space of a single generation, one of the most dramatic acoustic transformations any city has ever experienced. Entire books were written documenting the street cries of London vendors precisely because even Victorians understood these sounds were passing. Scholars recorded them, artists painted the cellars, novelists preserved their calls in fiction. They knew, even then, that the soundscape of their city was changing, that the voices which had shaped daily life for centuries were being swallowed by the roar of a newer, louder, more mechanical modernity. Even modern factories are quieter than their Victorian ancestors. Rubber mounts absorb vibration. Sound-dampening materials line the walls. Electric motors replace steam-driven belts. Workers wear hearing protection, a concept entirely alien to the cotton mill operative of 1850, who accepted deafness the way one accepts rain, inevitable, unpleasant, not worth complaining about. But if you stand in certain parts of London on a quiet night, near old brick alleys beside the Thames, or in a churchyard surrounded by buildings that were already old in Victoria's reign, you can, if you are receptive to it, feel something. Not quite silence, not quite noise, something in between. An acoustic memory, perhaps, held in stone and water, and the particular way that sound moves through this city even now. A distant bell, footsteps on wet pavement, the low rumble of something heavy moving somewhere unseen. And for a moment, just a moment, the Empire returns. Victorian London was not merely a city people saw. It was a city they endured through their ears. The Industrial Revolution did not arrive quietly, with polite notification and an orderly queue. It arrived screaming, with iron wheels and steam whistles and factory hammers, and the crying of 1,000,000 people pressed together in more noise than the world had ever heard in one place. And for those millions trapped inside it, silence had ceased to be merely pleasant. It had become the one luxury that even the wealthiest could not quite purchase, and the one comfort the poorest would never know. In 1850 London, silence was a luxury only the dead could truly afford.